I was 23 years old, and my father handed me his failing company. Not as a gift, as a test. He didn't say it like that, of course. He said it like he believed in me. He stood in his office on a Tuesday morning, sunlight cutting through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Chicago high-rise, and he told me the company was drowning. Meridian Solutions, a mid-tier B2B logistics firm that had been bleeding clients for 3 years straight. Revenue was collapsing. The board was losing patience. Most people would have walked away. I didn't. I was hungry in a way my father didn't understand. Not for money, for proof. For the moment he'd look at me and see something other than his daughter. See a builder, an architect of something real. The first 90 days were geometric hell. I worked from 5 a.m. until my eyes stopped focusing around midnight. I moved into a small apartment in River North, a 15-minute walk from the office. I kept a notebook, actual paper, not digital, where I mapped out every client we'd lost in the past 5 years. Not just names, reasons, delays, missed deadlines, promises made by senior managers who'd never followed through. I began to see the pattern. It wasn't the company that was broken. It was the structure. We were running logistics like it was still 1995. Our competitors had already automated routing. We were still using spreadsheets and phone calls. Our client relationship management system was a nightmare, fragmented across 3 different platforms. Information didn't flow. It bled everywhere. By month 4, I'd cut 13% of overhead without firing anyone. I renegotiated vendor contracts. I implemented a real CRM system, one that actually talked to our billing and dispatch systems. By month 6, we'd brought back our first lost client, then 2 more. My father started showing up to the office more. He'd stand in the doorway of my small office on the 2nd floor, smaller than his executive suite, naturally, and he'd watch me work. Not say anything, just watch. I remember the weight of those silences. I'd feel his eyes on me, and I'd know he was recalculating something in his head, reassessing. By year 2, Meridian Solutions was profitable again. By year 3, we were growing. I was the one in the client meetings. I was the one who understood the new systems, who could explain why our turnaround time had dropped by 37%, who could walk a nervous CEO through our redesigned logistics platform like I'd been born understanding its architecture. My father sat in some of those meetings. Mostly he didn't, but when he did, he'd introduce me like I was a trophy he'd won. "My daughter," he'd say, "she saved this company." I hated that phrasing, not the sentiment, the word daughter. Like that was the thing that mattered most about what I did. Still, the numbers didn't lie. By year 5, we'd expanded to 4 regional offices. Revenue had tripled. I'd hired a team of 32 people, young, smart people who believed in what we were building. I trained them. I ate lunch with them. I knew their names and their kids' names and their favorite coffee orders. That was the year my father had a minor heart attack. Not severe. The doctors said it was a warning. He spent a week in the hospital. I was there every morning before work and every evening after. He held my hand and told me I'd proven myself, that he was proud. "You're going to run this company for a long time," he said. His voice was hoarse from the oxygen tubes. "I've already told the board, when I step back, and I will step back, you're taking over completely, not as interim, as CEO." I believed him. I had no reason not to. The next 2 years were the best of my life. I expanded our product line. I hired a CFO, a woman named Patricia Chen who was absolutely brilliant with financial modeling. I negotiated our first enterprise contract, a deal that would have taken us from $70 million in annual revenue to nearly $85 million by the end of the fiscal year. The morning that contract was signed, I cried in my car. Not from stress, from joy, pure, uncomplicated joy. I'd done it. I'd taken my father's dying company and built it into something real, something that mattered. That was August 2019. By October, my father had decided to sell. No, that's not right. He'd already decided. He was just deciding how to tell me. I found out from Patricia. She called me into her office on a Friday morning. I remember because I was wearing a blue blazer, the one that made me feel powerful in client meetings. I remember sitting across from her desk and watching her face do something complicated, sadness mixed with professional embarrassment. "Your father met with 3 venture capital firms last month," she said quietly. "I only found out because they ran financial due diligence and asked me some questions that didn't match the narrative he's been giving them. Grace, they're looking at acquiring the company." My stomach didn't drop, it inverted. "He didn't tell me." Patricia shook her head. "He told the board, an emergency session 2 weeks ago. You weren't there because you were in Denver for the Westbrook contract negotiation. He's already in advanced discussions with a firm called Caldwell Partners. They're looking at a valuation of $87 million. $87 million. The number I'd built. The number that existed only because I'd spent 7 years of 12-hour days transforming a wreck into an asset. "What's his take?" I asked. My voice sounded normal. I'm grateful for that. I don't think I could have handled falling apart in that moment. 52%, Patricia said. "He's voting his shares for the acquisition. It passes the board unless I stop it." I had 30%. With my shares and mine alone, it wasn't enough. But with Patricia and 2 board members I'd brought in myself, I had 42%, enough to block it. Except I didn't know any of this yet when I walked into my father's office. He was on the phone when I arrived, just walked past his assistant and pushed through the double doors. He saw me and held up one finger. 1 minute. I didn't give him 1 minute. I stood there with my arms folded, watching him finish his call. He was smiling at something the person on the other end said. He had that expression he got when he was closing a deal, confident, amused, like he was the only person in the world who understood how the game actually worked. He hung up. "Grace, you're early for lunch." "We don't have lunch scheduled," I said. "You were planning to sell the company without telling me." I watched his face. It would be the perfect moment to describe what I saw: shock, defensiveness, anger. But the truth is, I mostly saw nothing. He'd already been processing this conversation in his mind. He already had his answer ready. "You're the chief operating officer," he said. "You're not the majority shareholder. This is a board decision." "A board decision you orchestrated, without telling me, when I've spent 7 years. "Building my company," he interrupted. "Yes, I know, and I'm grateful, I truly am." The word grateful hit something in my chest, like he was patting me on the head. "I'm also not getting any younger," he continued. "Your mother wants to travel. We've already missed the last decade doing that. Caldwell Partners is offering a price that means I can retire comfortably and still leave you and your brother very well provided for." My brother. David, 4 years younger than me. A trust fund kid who'd spent the last 6 years in a series of jobs that each lasted approximately 6 months before he got bored or made a catastrophic mistake or decided the position wasn't respecting his unique vision. "David isn't involved in this company," I said. "No, he isn't." My father leaned back in his chair. "Which is actually relevant to the conversation I was going to have with you Monday. Sit down, Grace." I didn't sit down. "Caldwell Partners is interested in something," he continued, standing because I wasn't complying with his request. "They're not just buying the assets. They want continuity. They want someone who understands the systems you built, someone who understands the clients and the team you've assembled." Hope, God, I felt it flare up in my chest like I was some kind of fool, like maybe this was going somewhere good. "They want you to stay as COO," he said, "for at least 3 years. There's a retention bonus of $2 million and a seat on the new operating board. It's a tremendous opportunity." COO. Not CEO. Not the position he'd promised me. Not the position I'd already announced internally that I was being groomed for. "What about my equity stake?" I asked. "You'll have buyout options. Caldwell doesn't typically allow minority shareholders to retain equity. They prefer to handle cap tables cleanly. But we negotiated a preferred buyout price." $2.6 million for your 30% stake. Or, he paused, watching me carefully, you can take the retention bonus and stay on as COO. They've been clear that you're the linchpin of the transition. Without you, they're less interested. $2.6 million. That sounded like a lot. It wasn't. Not compared to what my 30% stake would be worth if the company actually sold for $87 million. That would be $26 million, $1 million, 4 times what they were offering. You're stealing from me, I said. My father's face hardened. I'm offering you life-changing money and a prestigious position at a firm with national reach. I'm also being generous with your equity when Caldwell doesn't have to be. I suggest you recalibrate your gratitude. That was the moment something inside me crystallized. I remember the exact feeling, like a lock clicking into place. Some part of my brain that had been running on hope and family obligation just closed, shut down, rerouted all that energy somewhere new. I left his office without saying anything else. I didn't cry in the car this time. I drove back to my apartment in River North, and I sat at my kitchen table with a laptop and a notebook, and I started to think like someone who just realized she was in a war. Because that's what it was, not a negotiation, not a misunderstanding, a war where my father had already made his move, and now it was time for me to make mine. The first thing I did was call Patricia. She answered on the second ring, already knowing something had gone wrong from the fact that I was calling her cell phone and not scheduling a meeting. I want to see every piece of correspondence between my father and Caldwell Partners, I said. Everything. Email, contracts, board minutes, due diligence reports. Everything. Grace, I can't. Yes, you can. You're the CFO. Pull the files from the secure server. Do it today after hours. No one will know except you. There was a long silence. Are you going to fight this? She asked finally. I'm going to understand it first, I said. Then I'm going to fight it. Patricia sent me the files at 11 p.m. that night. 237 pages of contracts, amendments, board notes, and correspondence. I read through the entire thing by 4 a.m., running on coffee and something that burned like righteous anger but felt more like clarity. What I found was worse than simple theft. My father had told Caldwell Partners that the company's growth trajectory was his vision, that I was a capable operations person, but that the strategic direction, the product line expansions, the client acquisition strategy, the decision to pivot into enterprise contracts, all of that came from his vision. I was just the executor. In his own words, in an email to Caldwell's managing partner, Grace is excellent at implementation. She doesn't have the strategic mind that would build something like this from nothing, but she's learned well, and she'll be a valuable part of the transition team. I read that sentence 8 times. She'll be a valuable part of the transition team. Not the architect, not the visionary, not the person who'd spent 7 years making every critical decision that had defined the company's survival and growth. A transition team member. I could have confronted him. I could have shown him the email and demanded a retraction, demanded that he correct the record with Caldwell Partners. I could have hired a lawyer and fought the acquisition in court, tied it up in litigation for years. I did none of those things. Instead, I opened a new bank account, one my father didn't know about. I began to move money, my salary, my bonuses, my available liquid assets. I was building something, not a company, a foundation, a war chest. And I started to watch. For 3 months, I smiled and said nothing. I went to work. I transitioned the company to Caldwell Partners systems and methodologies. I trained my replacement, a man named Richard Kepler who had a Harvard MBA and absolutely no practical understanding of what made our client relationships work. I sat in meetings where my father and the Caldwell managing partner discussed knowledge transfer protocols. I listened to them praise the clean way they were handling the transition. I watched Richard fumble through client calls where the relationships existed only in my head and in the informal notes I'd been carefully maintaining. And I collected evidence. Every email where my father took credit for my work. Every board minute where my contributions went unmentioned. Every client contract that had my strategic analysis written into its margins, but my name nowhere on the official document. I photographed them. I printed them. I organized them by date and by type of misrepresentation. I created a timeline that showed, with mathematical clarity, the exact moment my father's version of events diverged from reality. In January of 2020, I received a call from David. My brother, the trust fund kid, the perpetual disappointment. "Dad wants to have a family dinner," he said, his voice tinny through my AirPods as I drove to the office. "Sunday at his place, you should come." "Why?" I asked. "Why should you come, or why does Dad want to have a dinner?" "Both." David laughed. "He wants to talk to us about the transition and celebrate the deal, I think. Also, Mom's making that thing you like, the braised short ribs." I hadn't realized I wanted to cry until the moment I knew I wouldn't. "I'll be there," I said. Sunday dinner at my father's house was like stepping back into a different era. Not a different time, but a different world where I was still the person I'd been before I understood what he actually thought of me. The house was beautiful. Understated wealth, the kind that felt comfortable rather than ostentatious. Dark wood floors, art that actually meant something, a wine collection that my father was genuinely passionate about. He'd chosen a 2015 Chateau ladder for the evening, expensive, but not so expensive that it felt like he was trying to prove something. My mother was already in the kitchen when I arrived, her hands moving with the efficiency of someone who'd made this dish 100 times. She hugged me with her shoulder so she wouldn't get her hands in my hair. "You look tired," she said, not accusatory, just observational. "I'm fine," I said. "How was Portugal?" They'd spent 6 weeks there in the fall. My father had sent me one postcard. David arrived an hour later with his current girlfriend, a woman named Becca who worked in social media marketing and had the kind of energy that made everyone around her feel exhausted. She asked me questions about the company in a way that made it clear she didn't understand what any of my answers meant. My father poured wine. We sat at the dining table, the one where I'd done my homework as a child, where my parents had celebrated my college graduation, where my father had once told me I could do anything if I just worked hard enough. "So," my father said, lifting his glass, "I wanted to celebrate with both of you. The acquisition of Meridian is officially closing next week, and the family benefits significantly from this transition." He looked at me when he said the next part. "Grace, you know your offer from Caldwell Partners. 2 million retention bonus, substantial equity upside if the company hits certain growth targets. You've done remarkable work building the operational infrastructure, and they value that. Deeply. Operational infrastructure, not vision, not leadership, not creation. Infrastructure. And David," my father continued, "I wanted to talk to you about something. You've been doing some consulting work recently." "PR consulting," Becca interjected. "David's incredibly talented with brand strategy." "Right," my father said, and I heard something in his voice. Something that might have been doubt, but might also have been charity. "Well, as part of the Caldwell acquisition, there's going to be a need for a PR and communications director. It's a new position. The company's never had dedicated communications. I recommended you for it." I watched David's face. He looked like someone had just handed him the thing he'd been looking for his entire life without even knowing he was looking for it. Like suddenly, in this moment, he was important. Like the job title made him real. "Really," he said. "It's a real opportunity," my father said. "The salary is substantial. You'd report directly to the board. You'd have significant influence over how Caldwell's acquisitions are communicated in the market. It's high-profile work." David reached over and squeezed Becca's hand. I watched this happen, and I understood something fundamental about my father. It wasn't that he'd betrayed me. It was that he'd never seen me in the first place. David was his son. That was enough. The actual capability, the actual competence. The actual years of work and sacrifice, none of that mattered. David was blood in the right combination, and that was the equation that solved for yes. I excused myself and went to the bathroom. I sat on the tile floor of my father's guest bathroom, and I felt something I hadn't let myself feel in months. Not anger, not even betrayal. Clarity, pure, cold clarity about what came next. I pulled out my phone, and I texted Patricia. I need everything. Every email, every document, every piece of evidence that shows what I actually did. Tomorrow. She replied within 3 minutes. Understood. What are you doing? I didn't respond. I didn't know yet, but I knew I was done asking for recognition. I was going to take it. The next week was a blur of strategic thinking and calculated positioning. I hired a lawyer. Not the kind who does corporate law, but the kind who does employment litigation and intellectual property disputes. Her name was Sandra Hoffman, and she was brilliant in the way that only truly terrifying women are: sharp-eyed, patient, and completely willing to burn someone's life down if the billable hours justified it. I want to understand what my legal exposure is, I said in her office on Tuesday morning. If I can demonstrate that my father misrepresented my role and contribution to Caldwell Partners, and if that misrepresentation resulted in my compensation being substantially lower than it should be, what are my options? Sandra leaned back in her chair. Depends on the state, the contract language, and whether there's explicit fiduciary duty language, she said. But in general, if your father is a controlling shareholder and he knowingly misrepresented your contribution to a third party in a way that materially affected your compensation, that's at minimum tortious interference with prospective economic advantage. Possibly fraud if he did it with intent to defraud. Can I prove intent? I asked. Do you have communications where he explicitly acknowledges that the growth strategy was yours? Sandra asked. I pulled out a folder. Inside were 47 pages of evidence. Emails where my father had asked for my strategic input. Board minutes where I'd presented expansions that he'd then voted to approve. Presentations I'd created that he'd then presented to investors, with my name mentioned once in passing, if that. Sandra read through them slowly. When she finished, she looked up at me. Your father's a thief, she said. Technically a misappropriator of intellectual property and contributory fraud, but practically, he's someone who took credit for his daughter's work and sold it to someone else. What can I do? Lots of things. Most of them involve litigation. All of them involve burning some bridges. Good, I said. What I didn't tell her, what I didn't tell anyone, was that I had no intention of using the legal system first. The legal system was predictable. It moved slowly. It relied on judges and juries and the assumption that facts actually mattered. I needed something faster. I needed to own the narrative. The next morning, I scheduled a meeting with Richard Kepler. Richard was my replacement at Meridian, the Harvard MBA who was now officially the COO as part of the Caldwell transition. He was 34, extremely competent, but foundationally arrogant in a way that suggested he'd never actually failed at anything. We met in the conference room on the 3rd floor, neutral territory, though that mattered less and less now. How's the transition going? I asked, setting down a coffee. Fine, he said. You've done a great job with the documentation. It's been relatively smooth. Any challenges? I asked. Just normal stuff. Client relationships that were more personality-based than I would have expected. Some institutional knowledge that wasn't written down, but we'll get there. What if I told you that most of that institutional knowledge is actually proprietary strategic analysis? I said casually. Richard looked at me. What do you mean? I mean that your transition plan is being built on information that was developed by me, under the assumption that it was work product belonging to the company, which it is. But the compensation I received for that work was calculated on the basis of a substantially different understanding of my role. Grace, I'm not really qualified to. I'm not asking you to be qualified. I'm telling you what happened. I'm explaining the situation because I think you should understand it. That way, when the litigation starts, at least you'll know what you're dealing with. I watched his face shift. The color drained slightly. Litigation. My father told Caldwell Partners that I was an executor of his strategy, that the growth of the company was his vision, that I was, essentially, a very capable operations person who followed his lead. Is that not true? Richard asked carefully. You have 3 months of working here. You've seen the operational systems. You've seen how they function. Do you think those systems emerged from nowhere, or do you think they emerged from strategic planning? Richard didn't answer. I'm not asking you to do anything, I said. I'm asking you to be aware, because what's about to happen is going to be messy, and you're going to be involved whether you want to be or not. But at least if you understand the actual facts, you can protect yourself. I stood up. By the way, I added, the Westbrook contract you were struggling with last week, that's an account I developed. I know the decision maker personally. If you want to talk through the relationship strategy, I'm happy to help, completely separate from all of this. He nodded slowly. I had just planted a seed, nothing more, but seeds grow. That afternoon, I called Patricia. I need you to send me a complete financial accounting of my total compensation since I started at the company. Salary, bonuses, benefits, equity valuations, everything. And I need a summary that shows what my compensation would have been if my actual strategic role had been recognized from the beginning. Patricia asked fewer questions this time. This is going to make trouble, she said. Yes, I agreed. Lots of it. Are you sure you want to do this? I thought about sitting at my father's dinner table. I thought about watching my brother get handed a job that he didn't deserve and didn't understand. I thought about 7 years of work being summarized as valuable implementation. I'm sure, I said. That evening, I had coffee with a reporter. Her name was Maya Liu, and she worked for a business publication called Modern Capital. They did deep investigative reporting on corporate malfeasance, founder fraud, and the kinds of stories that made corporate boards nervous. I'd chosen her specifically because she had a reputation for being thorough and fair. I didn't want a hit piece. I wanted the truth, told in a way that people would actually care about. Why are you telling me this? She asked after I'd explained the situation and handed her a USB drive with copies of every document I had. Because the Caldwell acquisition was valued at $87 million, I said. Because I built the systems and strategy that created that value. Because my father sold that value without acknowledging where it came from. And because I think people should know what really happened. Maya looked at the USB drive in her hands like it might explode. This could destroy your relationship with your family, she said. You understand that, right? I understand, I said, but they destroyed it first. I'm just making sure everyone else knows what happened. She interviewed me for 7 hours over the next 2 weeks. She verified every document, contacted Patricia independently, spoke with board members I'd identified, pulled court records and corporate filings. She was ruthless in the way that good journalists are, not interested in my feelings, only in the facts. On Friday morning, 4 weeks after my father had told me about the acquisition, Maya's article published. The headline was careful but devastating. How one woman built a $87 M company, then her father sold her future. The story was 8,000 words. It walked through my first day at Meridian Solutions. It detailed the specific strategic decisions that had turned the company around, with dates, amounts, and quantified impacts. It included the emails where my father had described me as an excellent implementer. But the most damaging part was toward the end, where Maya had obtained a copy of what my father had actually told Caldwell Partners about the valuation. He'd said that the enterprise contract, the one that had pushed our revenue to $85 million, was something he'd identified and nurtured, with my assistance. The truth was that I'd identified the prospect, built the relationship over 18 months, designed the solution architecture, negotiated the terms, and closed it. My father had approved it, in one meeting. The article didn't say this with outrage. That was the genius of it. It just presented the facts, let them speak for themselves, and then quoted from his emails where he claimed credit. By 11 a.m., my phone was ringing. My father first. "What the fuck have you done?" His voice was steady, but I could hear the rage underneath it like an electrical current. "Told the truth," I said calmly. "You've destroyed this company. You've embarrassed this family. You've blown up your own career in the process." "Actually," I said, "I've done what I should have done months ago. I've created a public record of what I actually did. Caldwell Partners is going to read this article. Your board is going to read it. And they're going to understand that the woman you described as an excellent implementer is actually the architect of the entire organization." "You're finished," he said. "I'm removing you from the company immediately. I'm also suing you for breach of confidence. Whatever you think you've accomplished, you're about to lose everything." He hung up. Sandra called next. She'd already seen the article. "Okay, this is actually incredible," she said. "Caldwell's going to have to renegotiate. They're not buying what they thought they were buying. The valuation was predicated on continuity of vision, and your father just proved that the vision was yours. They're going to come after him legally, and they're probably going to make you a hell of an offer to stay." But I was waiting for a different call. It came at 2:47 p.m. "Richard, I just got off the phone with the Caldwell board," he said. "They're removing your father from the company, effective immediately. They're asking if you'd be willing to come back as CEO while they figure out the broader transition. Massive signing bonus, equity stake, stock options." I closed my eyes. This was the moment where I could have felt triumph, where I could have felt vindicated. Instead, I mostly felt tired. "Tell them I need to think about it," I said. I needed to think about whether I actually wanted to come back, whether building Meridian Solutions again, this time under different ownership, in a different context, was what I actually wanted, or whether what I actually wanted was just this, my father's face when he realized he'd been outplayed. I had that now. He'd texted David an hour after my father called me. David called me immediately, his voice shaking. "What did you do?" he asked. He sounded betrayed, which was funny because he'd done nothing to deserve anything I'd given him, and everything to deserve exactly what was happening. "I told the truth," I said. "Dad says you're being fired. He says he's going to sue you." "He's probably going to try," I agreed, "but it won't work." "Grace, he's devastated. Mom is devastated. This is him finally understanding that his daughter wasn't where he thought she was," I said quietly. "He thought I was someone he could take credit for. He's learning otherwise." That evening, my mother called. She didn't mention the article. She just asked if I was okay. "I'm fine," I said. "You don't sound fine," she said. "You sound like someone who just won something and is realizing that winning cost more than she thought it would." I didn't respond for a long moment. "Did he really tell them it was his vision?" I asked. "Yes," my mother said. She sounded tired. "He did. I was in the room when he had that call with the Caldwell Partners. I heard what he said. And I should have told you, I should have spoken up. I'm sorry I didn't." That was the part that actually broke something inside me. Not my father's betrayal. I'd already processed that, metabolized it, transformed it into fuel. But my mother's, because she'd known, and she'd chosen not to interrupt the family narrative. "I have to go," I said. I called Sandra back and asked her to prepare a comprehensive legal strategy against my father for fraud, tortious interference, and breach of fiduciary duty. Then I called Caldwell Partners and asked them to formalize their offer. Then I called Maya and gave her a follow-up interview where I talked about what it felt like to have your own parent erase your contributions. By the next morning, the story had spread. Business publications were calling it a case study in founder fraud. LinkedIn was full of women sharing similar experiences. Twitter was burning with people debating whether my father had committed actual crimes. He'd committed actual crimes. Sandra filed suit on my behalf exactly 3 weeks after the article published. The legal complaint detailed every instance where my father had misrepresented my role. It quantified the value of my intellectual property. It argued that he'd committed fraud and had violated his fiduciary duties as a controlling shareholder. We were asking for $42 million. That was the number. $42 million, which represented $16 million. The difference between what I should have made, $26 million for my 30% stake, and what I would have made under my father's misrepresentation, $2.6 million. Plus compound interest, attorney fees, and punitive damages. My father fought it. He hired the most expensive lawyer in Chicago. He argued that as the founder, the company was fundamentally his creation, and that I was an employee, however talented, of his vision. He claimed that the article I'd given to Maya was a breach of confidentiality and that I'd violated my employment agreements. He also argued that I was a betrayer of family trust, though that argument didn't hold up in court because family trust isn't a legal category. The lawsuit lasted 14 months. During that time, I served as CEO of Meridian Solutions under Caldwell Partners ownership. I rehired Patricia as CFO. I brought on the management team I trusted. I watched my father deteriorate in real time. He stopped coming to the office entirely, stopped appearing at board meetings, ultimately stopped leaving his house except for legal appointments. My mother asked if I wanted to have coffee. We met at a cafe in Lincoln Park on a Tuesday morning. She looked older, not just physically, but something deeper. Like she'd aged from understanding something about herself she'd preferred not to know. "He's depressed," she said without preamble. "He's on medication. The therapist says he's experiencing what amounts to an identity crisis. He built everything in his mind, and that everything is being taken away." "He's experiencing consequences," I said. "I know," she said, "and I think you're right to pursue this. I also think he's my husband and he's suffering and I don't know how to help him." I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't say anything. "Do you hate him?" she asked. "No," I said, and I was surprised to find that it was true. "I don't hate him. I just required him to be accountable for what he did." The settlement came down in March. Caldwell Partners, facing the publicity disaster of being associated with founder fraud, pressured my father to settle. He paid $15 million to me directly. Another $7 million went to settle with Caldwell Partners themselves for the misrepresentation of the company's value. I took the money, and I didn't cry. I took it and I set up a fund for early-stage female founders. I took it, and I promoted Patricia to president of Meridian. I took it, and I continued building the company, which was now valued at $112 million and was profitable and was growing at 30% year over year. My father took early retirement. He and my mother moved to a small house in Santa Fe. He stopped trying to contact me. David's new PR job fell apart when Caldwell Partners realized he was incompetent, so he went back to being a trust fund kid with a series of brief careers. On the first anniversary of the article publishing, Maya reached out for a follow-up. "How does it feel?" she asked, "to have one?" "Like I'm still building," I said. "Like the company is the real victory and all of the rest was just what it took to get here." "Any regrets?" she asked. I thought about my family. I thought about the bridge I'd burned. I thought about the fact that I'd never have the narrative I'd originally wanted, the one where my father was proud of me, where he didn't need to steal credit because he was genuinely celebrating what I'd done. "No," I said, "no regrets." And I meant it. Because here's what I learned. The people who need to steal your work are the people who are afraid that without it, they're nothing. And that's not your problem. That's theirs. My job was to be undeniable. And I am.